Every generation has its own version of struggle. Older people remember recessions, layoffs, high interest rates, bad jobs, long hours, and the pressure of building a life with no guarantees. Younger people are not wrong to respect that, but younger people are also looking at a different world. A world where rent eats more of the paycheck, starter homes feel out of reach, cheap cars are no longer cheap, and the old first step into adulthood seems harder to find. So when someone says, just work hard, the reaction is not always laziness or entitlement. Sometimes it is frustration. Because people are not only asking whether life is hard, they are asking whether the struggle still leads somewhere. And this is why the conversation gets so emotional. Because when people talk about the death of the starter life, they are rarely only talking about money. They are talking about fairness, about expectations, about promises, about the feeling that they followed the instructions only to find out the instructions were written for a different economy. That is where the anger comes from. Older generations often hear this conversation and say, "We struggled too." And they are right. They did. They lived through recessions. They dealt with layoffs, inflation, high interest rates, political uncertainty, wars, bad jobs, long hours, and all kinds of pressure that younger people today should not casually dismiss. It would be dishonest to pretend the past was easy just because some things were cheaper. A cheaper house does not mean life was painless. A lower rent does not mean people were rich. A factory job, an office job, a small business, a mortgage, a family, a used car, none of that came without stress. So the point is not, older people had no problems. That is lazy. The point is that the structure of starting was different, and that is what younger people are trying to explain when they push back. They are not always saying, "You never struggled." They are saying, "Yes, but at least your struggle had a door." Because there is a difference between struggling inside the house and struggling outside the door. There is a difference between fighting to keep a home and fighting for years just to afford the first month's rent and deposit. There is a difference between buying a modest house at a painful interest rate and watching the modest house disappear from the market entirely. There is a difference between driving an ugly, cheap car that breaks down sometimes and living in a world where even the ugly, cheap car somehow costs thousands more than expected. There is a difference between starting small and not being able to start at all. And that difference is hard to explain across generations because both sides are telling the truth from where they stand. Older people remember the struggle. Younger people are looking for the entry point. Older people remember sacrifice. Younger people are asking why sacrifice no longer seems to lead to stability. Older people remember how hard it was to build a life. Younger people are asking why the first step now requires so much income, debt, luck, or family support. That is why the conversation turns bitter so quickly. One side feels accused of having had it easy. The other side feels accused of being weak. And underneath all of that noise is a much more uncomfortable reality. The map has not changed, but the terrain has. Society still sells people the old map. Go to school, get a job, work hard, move out, buy a car, save money, buy a home, start a family, build wealth, retire with dignity. That is still the script. It is still what parents tell children. It is still what politicians talk about. It is still what ads sell. It is still what movies, schools, banks, employers, and financial advice often assume in the background. But for millions of people, the roads on that map have been blocked, tolled, privatized, flooded, or priced like luxury real estate. The route still exists culturally, it just does not exist economically in the same way. And that gap creates rage. Because it is one thing to be told life is hard. People can accept that. Most people already know life is hard. They are not asking for struggle to disappear. They are asking for the struggle to make sense. They are asking for hard work to still have a direction, for saving to still lead somewhere,
for discipline to still create options, for patience to still have a reward, for adulthood to still have an entry level. But when people work, save, sacrifice, and still feel stuck at the beginning, the old advice starts to sound insulting. Not because the advice is always wrong. Working hard matters, saving matters, learning skills matters, avoiding stupid debt matters, making good choices matters. But advice becomes insulting when it ignores the price of the world people are living in. Just move out sounds different when rent takes half your income. Just buy a starter home sounds different when the starter home was bought by an investor, flipped, rented out, or priced like a forever home. Just get a better job sounds different when the better job requires credentials, unpaid time, relocation, transportation, connections, or a financial cushion you do not have. Just stop wasting money sounds different when the biggest expenses are not coffee, but housing, transport, healthcare, education, food, insurance, and debt.
This is where the anger comes from. Not from laziness, not from entitlement, not from a generation suddenly deciding that comfort should be free. It comes from a broken relationship between effort and reward. People are willing to struggle, but they want to believe the struggle is building something. They want to believe that if they do the right things, slowly, imperfectly, over time, they can move forward. And when that belief weakens, society gets cynical. People stop trusting the advice. They stop trusting institutions. They stop trusting the future. They look at the people who already own homes, assets, businesses, and investments, and they wonder whether the game is still open or whether they arrived after the doors were locked. That is dangerous, because the death of the starter life does not just create financial frustration, it creates social resentment between young and old, renters and owners, workers and asset holders, people with family support and people without it, people who bought before prices exploded and people trying to buy after, people who mistake their timing for virtue and people who mistake their struggle for personal failure. And that is why this conversation has to be handled carefully. Because this is not about hating older generations. It is not about pretending young people have no responsibility. It is not about turning economics into a family argument at the dinner table. It is about recognizing that different generations can both be telling the truth and still be living in completely different economic realities. Yes, older generations struggled. But many of them struggled on a path that still had visible steps. Today, many younger people are struggling just to find the first step, and that difference is important. Because when society keeps selling the old dream without rebuilding the entry point, anger becomes inevitable. You cannot keep telling people to climb the ladder while removing the bottom rungs. You cannot keep selling adulthood as a reward for hard work while making the basic version of adulthood unaffordable. You cannot keep blaming individuals for failing to reach milestones that the economy itself has pushed further away. At some point, people notice. They notice that the advice stayed the same while the prices changed. They notice that the expectations stayed the same while the wages failed to keep up. They notice that the dream is still advertised, but the starter version has disappeared. And once people notice that, the anger is not irrational. It is the sound of people realizing that the map they were given no longer matches the world they have to walk through. And if the map no longer matches the world, then the answer cannot be to simply blame one generation or excuse another. The real question is what kind of first step we are willing to build now, because people still need a way to begin. In the next video, we'll look at what that new first step might look like, and why the answer cannot only be personal responsibility, but also cannot only be waiting for politics to fix everything. If you haven't seen the earlier videos in this series, they're on screen now. I'm the Uneducated Economist. Thanks for watching.